Hey, everyone here at the Investing Stuff You Should Know podcast. We are delighted to have Schuyler Cadwalader with us today. He's from the West Coast. He's an architect, but he's also a multifamily. I'm kind of a maestro of all kinds of different cool things going on there. So, Schuyler, thanks for being with us and about to share some very compelling things with the audience and myself here. And I'm actually eager to learn and know more.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Johnny. Excited to be here.
So good, man. So good. So you and I were doing a little pre-chat there. I think you're on the West Coast, and then you have a background in architecture. And the thing that's related and very relevant to the audience, at least a lot of the audience that listen to this show, is of course the multifamily background. A lot of that is in the existing product, but oftentimes people don't think about the fact that like some architect, an engineer, an architect, and this, that, and the other plan and drew and developed these things, whether it was from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, just like, oh, this existing thing just is, it is. There's been a lot more interest, as we both know, in the development side, but talk to us about this background that you have in working with developers and the kind of training and kind of your own personal story too.
Sure. Yeah. So architect by training, went to University of Pennsylvania, came out of there, did some hospital work for a while. Didn't like that for all the reasons you might imagine. Wasn't the most exciting thing in the world.
Like seriously, I'm not sure. I don't know. Is it just like kind of very like kind of mundane, very detailed, very minute?
For some people, it's the most interesting thing in the world. It just wasn't for me. You know what I mean? There's when you start getting in the nitty gritty of like lab rooms and operating rooms, there's a lot going on in there, and a lot of it is like, oh wow, this is not feeling very Frank Lloyd Wrighty. So
not a lot of room for interpretation of new novel design of artistic rendering of operating rooms.
And don't get me wrong, it's super important work, and there is amazing creative things being done, but it's just of a very specific variety, right?
Fair enough, sir.
Always wanted to be in housing, and heard of this company called Katerra that I wound up working for a long time, which was basically trying to disrupt and speed up the multifamily development process. And it was kind of an interesting company, SoftBank founded, lots of money, lots of really fast growth. Wound up not working in the end, but I was there for about 5 years and helped get a lot of projects going there. It was pretty exciting. We were moving very fast using panelized wall systems. I was even on some projects that use CLT, which is cross-laminated timber, which is like kind of a new structural material. That was all very exciting. And I learned a lot. And there was a ton of really smart people there. I worked one-on-one with some developers and basically figured out eventually that I was like, I think I'm on the wrong side of the table here, and I'd like to get on the equity side, which is not very common for architects to get on that side of the table, unless maybe you run your own business or something. But I never really was interested in starting an architecture firm. So that's kind of how I got into multifamily investing.
Yeah, no, I love the thread there. Let's drill down into the Katerra space a little bit more here.
Sure.
We don't talk a lot about it on this show here. We actually have another podcast called House Now 3D, and that's more focused on the kind of modular and some newer construction techniques. But since we're here and we're talking about this, let's talk a little more about Katerra. Yeah. Tell us when they were founded. I know that we're not going to focus entirely on this, but just because it's an interesting topic. Tell us when they were founded, if you know, and then kind of what was the core like thesis and motivation there. So was it affordable housing? Was it like, not just single family, but, modular, multifamily? Kind of give us the background there.
Yeah, the founding is a little hard for me to say exactly because I think they were around longer than I think, but they were like kind of under the radar.
Sure.
So call it 2015-ish, maybe 16.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, somewhere in that area. But I know that there was a small team that worked at it for a pretty long time before they kind of became, public. And I found a job listing and all that. And so Katerra was a really great idea, which was basically the story I heard was that the founder of Katerra met a developer friend for dinner, and it was like in a downtown city, and there were two new projects being built across from each other, and the tech guy was saying, hey, you must be getting a great deal on the windows on that project because you're building this one over here too. And the developer guy was like, it doesn't really, in this case, it doesn't work that way. There aren't really that many cross efficiencies between properties. They're kind of each their own little island. And tech guy said, well, that's interesting. And I think I can probably help with that because that's what we do is create efficiencies. So this is where the whole disrupting idea came from with
Classic,
multifamily construction.
classic Silicon Valley, break fast and move fast, break things, disrupt, 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 right?
Exactly. Just looking for inefficiencies that maybe they could sweep up. So that's apparently how it was founded. And yeah, when I got there, they were pushing a couple of product types already. One was your classic garden style apartment building. Another one was sort of what we call the podium style, which was like a ground floor or two of concrete with like 4 or 5 stories of wood frame construction on top of that, kind of more urban infill type stuff, but big. And there were a few other ones, but those were the two that I mainly was involved with. And then there were a lot more initiatives than that too, on a software perspective and HVAC perspective. And there was a lot going on in hindsight, a little too much going on, I would say.
Because the story, I'm not sure if we shared it with folks, but Katera went bankrupt. They went out of business.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. I think COVID had something to do with that. That was really just like the last pain point. There was
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, things were not going in the right direction before that, but I think that was sort of just like once we were all work from home, job sites got shut down for like a little too long, and it was just like time to wrap it up.
Yeah. So we see that people are and have tried, and of course there's been failures, but repeated failure, if done right, and learnings occur, you can improve on the process. And I think there's some really interesting things going on in the space, just aside from Katera. So thank you for sharing that insight there into that stint you had there at that company. Talk to us before we kind of step into that bridge, of course, between your corporate life and then, of course, the multifamily investing. Schuyler, talk to us about what kind of considerations, and you've worked with I'm sure there's probably other projects as well, working with developers and multifamily. What, just aside from the how it's built, what are some design considerations when when whether it's existing building or a new project? What are some of the things that architects look at, that think about, they consider, they tell the clients, they tell the developer? Walk us through that process.
Yeah, the developer brings a lot to the table in terms of like the basics of what they want in terms of, unit mix and type and things like that. And so to a large extent, it's like a puzzle game. Multifamily is like a puzzle where you're trying to fit all the pieces within. There's basically, one of the first things we do is we get basically the site drawn out, and we basically build an envelope of what we know we can fill up, from setbacks on all sides of the site to the maximum height, and you kind of fill that out. And then we sort of go through, we take what the developer has in mind from like a unit count and square footage perspective and all that. And we just start running through different building massing studies and shapes. And oftentimes what's interesting about multifamily, but can be a little bit frustrating about multifamily, is oftentimes it makes sense to design the units first, because then you just stack them, right? It's almost like Lego to a certain extent, right? And it's like, you don't really want to design a form and then shoehorn units into it. You could do a little bit of that at the ends and at the bends and the corners and things like that. But to a certain extent, once you know your unit mix, it's sort of like, okay, let's make ones that work together, that stack in an efficient manner, and then run through some like big ideas on like how this building is actually going to lay out. And of course, the name of the game when you're working with developers, most developers, is just absolutely maxing out the floor area ratio, just getting as many square feet built on the site as you possibly can, because each one of those has a dollar value, right? So the more you can do, the better. And then you just do your market study. You got to know how, usually these days with any ground up development, you're going pretty much luxury. So going all in on, the countertops and nice appliances and flooring, it's no one's really building, class B minus ground up anymore. You kind of just jump right to top of market. So
I hear you, man.
You just help guide them through all of that as well.
I say, well, that's I love that insight about, like you just shared, about the starting with the unit and like basically like just a modular box, and then you go inside the box and then you design like the lookout, and then it's standardized. That's something huge as a former mechanical engineer and an investor, this, that, and the other. That's huge. And basically have these components, and you have like the 1 bed, the studio, the 2 bed, whatever that mix is, and then you just design that out. And obviously the doors can change. I'm sure you have multiple iterations where the main entrance is. But then of
Sure.
course, then you start, stacking that up and you build out, like how many of these units can we just build out and fill up this,
Yeah.
this already existing, setbacks and zoning restrictions and all those kinds of things. So
Yeah.
that gives the audience, we give myself, some maybe just kind of refresher course or clarity on how that works. So
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
I love what you said about at the beginning when you're giving your intro, Schuyler, about the being on the wrong side of the table. And this happened with real estate agents, this happened with engineers, this happened with even like guys like that are doing like the site work, like ground, not all developers or the subcontractors, but they see that too sometimes.
Mhm.
Why doesn't that happen more often? I feel like it's less of that than more of like there's all these professionals, all these trades, all these different professions that work with these development. Maybe they can see it. Maybe that's the question. They can't see the kind of value that's created. Why aren't they demanding, insisting, offering something to be on that side of the table that you talked about? Walk us through that, and why is there not more of that?
Yeah, I think it's hard. I think for the first of all, I think most people don't even really know how development works, how the financing works, how the equity is split between parties. How many, I think there is sort of like a soft cap about how many parties you really want involved to begin with, just from
Yeah.
an administrative and probably a SEC compliance perspective. There might be at a certain point where it starts getting a little weird. And I think a lot of the times it's sort of like, you have to choose how you get paid. Do you want to get your money in cash today, or do you want your equity and hopefully cash later? And the reality is, most people coming out of college, they need their cash today. And they design their lives in such a way because they're young and they haven't really figured the game out yet. That the game was just to get a job, right?
Yes.
That's the only game any of us know about it first. And then later into getting a job, you get that first money, you get the nice apartment, you get a little bit more money, you have a kid, and you wind up in a place where you kind of always have to take the money. You know what I mean? It's very
So
hard. Just
it kind of just kind of compounds the cycle, the
yeah,
commitment, the initial commitment. You're kind of like locked into the game, even though after a while you realize, or potentially you could realize, there's multiple levels to the game. The people that are
right.
playing at a higher level, like they have figured out how to somehow bridge that, and it's difficult to crush through that next level, right?
It's really hard because I think the lifestyle creep is the thing that will really get you, right? Like for example, if you have student loans, like right out of the gate, like you just need to be paid as much cash as you can, and you don't really have the leeway to play around, play games, and say, oh, I'll give you a big discount, but I want an equity stake in this. And oftentimes, it's one thing if maybe you're a firm that has all the engineering in house, right? And maybe they as a company can arrange something like that, but it's kind of hard just as like just the architect or just the plumbing engineer or something. Again, like how much do you want to split all this out? Because it might not be a huge amount of money that any one of these groups is getting paid. So it's just tough. And again, you have to understand underwriting. You have to be able to look under the hood and be an investor too, right?
Yeah,
Like
that's
you,
huge.
and
Because
that's
it's not intuitive. It's not necessarily intuitive at all, until you like take that
right.
ownership.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
the people paying you to do this development project could be making a huge mistake. You know what I mean? It might not work out for them and their investors, even though you, as a mechanical engineer, did a great job on your side of things. But
yeah,
that's just a whole different world from the investing world, right?
for sure, for sure. That I think is an amazing segue. I was going to take it another place, but I think that's a good segue into this idea that you have of sovereignty. Let's
Mm.
talk about that. A lot of people chat on. I've said it many times myself about financial freedom. Maybe it's gotten overused. Maybe it didn't quite have the right ring. Maybe in some circumstances it's the right message to send to maybe someone that's truly hasn't even thought about financial freedom. But you have a kind of a twist on that, or a more sophisticated idea, and that's kind of financial sovereignty or just sovereignty. Walk me through the underlying philosophy there, if you would, Schuyler.
Yeah, I think financial freedom sounds great, but it's sort of like a first step to me. It's sort of like there's always the then what. It's like, okay, you don't have to go to work, but like, what do you, is it just margaritas from here on out? Like, what's next? And so,
Is that a fulfilling life? Just drinking on the beach? Like that sounds
yeah,
kind of
right.
vacuous.
I think it gets really bad really fast, actually. You get to like day 10, and it's like, this is not going well. So, yeah. And I think sovereignty is such a more powerful term. Like when I think of freedom, it's sort of like, okay, you are no longer captured or enslaved. You have, choices, but sovereignty actually comes from the word rule. It means like self-rule. It means you actually have more agency, I think, than just freedom alone, because I don't think freedom is very meaningful in and of itself. And so, for us, the big thing is sovereignty and getting to a place where we have, it is a form of freedom, but we also want to keep growing. We want to actually get better at life in just about every way, whether that's being physically fit or having meaningful relationships, spending more time with family, all of that stuff. And, hopefully scaling our own little business so that we have something to pass on to our family and to grow into ourselves, so that we're not just drinking margaritas all day and patting ourselves on the back for buying some apartment buildings.
For sure. Yeah. So let's further that. So then, so sovereignty is self-rule and kind of like, and so what does that mean to you, and how do you put that into practice here? So how does that tie in? So people have been, yelling the word financial freedom, and that to get that, want to go from 9 to 5 and get financially free and then invest in apartments or real estate, but then kind of tie it in for us, thread that tapestry into how that ties into sovereignty, and just from your perspective and the way you approach it.
Yeah, I think to a certain extent, it comes to just like adding meaning back into the freedom. Like, what is the freedom?
Oh, okay.
Like, what are you gonna do with it? Like, because when you talk to someone who has a job or a tough life in some way, you say, I have financial freedom. They're kind of like, good for you. Like, you don't seem like you're helping the world very much, but like, knock yourself out. You know what I mean? But I think getting to a point where you've got not, you got to use that freedom for something. You know what I mean? And it's kind of tough. We're still on our way there, but I do love the idea of getting to a place where you can just dedicate a lot of your time to, generous causes and doing really meaningful stuff for other people. Like that's in some ways like the best reason to become uh free, in some
Yeah.
sense of the word. And yeah,
Let's
go
get
ahead.
yeah, let's get specifics here. So we've cast many times on the in this podcast the vision of, getting financially free, but
Yeah.
let's give some tangibles here. So like what are some things that you see that are really meaningful to people? Or like you said, you share with someone like, oh, I'm financially free, and if they're on the path and it's like exciting, maybe you're a
Yeah,
year or two ahead of them, like, oh yeah, I want to be there too, like learn,
totally.
let me learn. But then like maybe somebody like just got a 9 to 5 job, they haven't really heard about this, so like, oh cool, you're independently wealthy or something. What does resonate? What are the things that you're actually doing or your team's doing, and the things that
Mhm.
you've found people resonate with? I'm sure you've shared something like, oh, that's meaning, that's a comment. That's more common across whether I have a 9 to 5, I'm retired, I'm young, old, I'm financially free or whatever.
Mhm.
What are some things there that you've seen that really are impactful?
I think education and kind of like helping people with mindset is really something I'm passionate about. I love meeting people in person, and
Yeah.
I really, really like, because I think this is going to sound kind of cliche, and a lot of people would probably find a reason to get mad about it. But I think a
Okay.
lot of a lot of a lot of people in poverty have a poverty mindset, and that's just you're
Yeah.
just doomed until you fix that. There's absolutely zero chance, right? You are going to make it with like a victimhood, woe is me, maybe if we vote for this person, maybe if we show up at this event, and it's just like, man, first of all, no one is coming to save you ever. No one is listening. No one really cares. Anyone who says they are is selling you something, or they need something from you. But like, generally speaking, it's up to you. And I think a lot of people just never get that message in life, right? They never have someone in a loving way, in an encouraging way, say,
Yes.
it's really up to you. And I'm here to help. I can show you what I've learned, and I'm learning myself, so I don't want to paint myself as some wise top of the mountain guru by any stretch of the imagination. But I do think, having some of those basic financial lessons, just like understanding that things like the hedonic treadmill, that just buying more stuff is not going to ever get you there. It's
Yeah,
it'll never make you happy. It'll never make you rich. And, it's funny because you see people who aren't particularly wealthy spending their money in the craziest ways, right? Like you don't see
absolutely.
Bill Gates in a Gucci belt, you know what I mean? It's just like, and I see that, in my own life too, with, friends of the family who are very successful. Like a lot of them you wouldn't even know, but you, give them an opportunity to invest. And it's like, oh, wow, they have a lot of money to invest. And these people have done very well for themselves. So
Yeah,
I
it's
think
an
have,
interesting inverse
yeah,
relationship of that quiet wealth, and there's a lot has been said on that, but
yeah.
oftentimes the wealth, yeah, good.
Or if it does get a little bit on the loud side, it's because they have like overshot so far that it's not a big deal. They're not reaching to buy that luxury car or that
For
nice
sure.
house. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And and again, on the practical there, I know you're trying not to, and it's not whatever is genuine. Schuyler is obviously is what you actually do here. Give us an actual thing that you found on the sharing with folks, or maybe providing some resources on the shifting in the poverty mindset. I'm truly interested in helping those people and being a resource there myself. Not that I also don't put myself as some type of wise, has made it type of dude, but
yeah.
also we do meet people that are like, hey, like I think you're capable of so much more. Share some things, some practical things there that people could do, or there are organizations you're part of, or things you've done yourself.
Yeah, and I'm still figuring this out myself, and this is kind of like where I'd like to get to some extent. Like I get little opportunities here and there,
Sure.
particularly at like real estate meetups and something. You might just get someone surprisingly kind of young there,
Yeah.
and someone who doesn't really have any idea, but they're just like, I'm here to learn, and they're starry eyed, and
Yeah.
they haven't been kicked in the teeth yet, but that's okay. You got to get that. You got to get a few of those out of the way. And occasionally, someone just off of like LinkedIn calls me, and I'll jump on a call with them, and it's like
Yeah.
a 21-year-old kid, you know what I mean, who
Yeah.
like dropped out of college but really wants to know what I'm up to and like what my strategy is, and like I'll talk to you all day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we can have them.
So making yourself
Yeah.
available. So like there's not necessarily a
Yes.
methodology or a formal process right now. Like, oh, I joined
No.
the poverty mindset, get out of whatever group. It's like, just, hey, if I'm available for this type of thing and I'm passionate, and I'm, maybe it'll grow into something larger, bigger, or whatever, or maybe it doesn't. Either way, you're still out there
Yeah,
providing
and so
providing
right
that help.
now it's really trying to just pay it forward as much as I can. I'd like to find a way to formalize that more, but I haven't really fully achieved like the levels of success that I'm hoping to get to. I'm still not I
Same
haven't reached
here.
my Brandon Turner phase, you know what I mean? Where I
For
can
sure. For
start
sure.
these amazing groups and charities and all that yet. I still have a little ways to go, but that's some of the stuff that really motivates me in general.
Yeah, and following that North Star, getting out the compass and saying where that is, or whatever the guidance you want to look at, those things people resonate with, and they sense that's real. It's a real commonality there, and it kind of touches back to the beginning of what you're saying there. Some people saying financial freedom, or maybe even the word sovereignty, like what the hell, even that won't resonate with people. Like you said, good for you, knock yourself out. But then when you say like,
Right.
hey, this is something, like this is truly like helping, more people come out of poverty, increasing wealth, encouraging people to be more creative and be creators, then people like, hey, like, I don't care where you're working at a gas station or you're a CEO, like, hey, I resonate with that idea, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I would love to get to a point where we formalize that in our business model, where
Yeah.
X% of what we do goes to this, or like this is a group that we are working with in perpetuity in some sense. We're not really there yet because we're still just like scaling into a proper business, and we don't really have any business, making any long-term commitments yet. But that's a place I would love to get to.
Awesome, man. So that's a good a stepping stone into talking about your business. So that's Upwealth Capital.
Yeah.
And then you focus in within that on, of course, we're talking, so there's the ones like the passionate side. So there's like financial freedom and the corporate life, and then of course helping those around you. And then there's actually, well, what's sustaining this? And of course we have to have a wise, sustainable, smart business model. And that's, oftentimes people will start up a fund or a syndication company, or, your case is Upwealth Capital, and you seem to cater towards healthcare professionals. So talk to
Yeah.
us about some of that engagement, like how have you reached them? Why healthcare professionals? And then of course, even people are like, oh, healthcare is, it must be a doctor, probably wealthy. Like many doctors commit suicide. Many doctors,
Yeah.
you know, leave the profession. It's a very, very stressful, hard hours and very demanding job. And not that everyone, every healthcare person is a doctor, but you know, those kinds of people have very demanding jobs. And talk to
Mhm.
us about some of the things you've seen, the needs there, and just why that has been kind of taken root as the core of the business model for UpWealth.
Yeah. So my wife is a doctor,
Okay, amazing.
and in 2020, we were pregnant with our first child right when the pandemic hit Seattle. She
Wow.
works in critical care, neurointensivist, so people with traumatic and potentially life-ending brain injuries. It's a bad day if you're having if she's your doctor. And it was just really one of those moments where we were just like, man, because you have to remember back in early 2020, we had no idea what this thing was really capable of, this virus. And so, she had to go to work every day and basically hazmat up 12-hour shifts, 7 days a
Yeah,
week, seven on,
yeah.
seven off. And it was a grind and really scary because we didn't know what potentially could happen to our child either, right? That was still totally unknown. And basically from that point on, everything worked out okay. But the healthcare industry is in a really weird place right now, where they've lost many hospital systems have lost an absolute ton of money and are just grinding up a lot of their employees to make up for losses from the pandemic, like
Exactly what we're
huge.
saying there. I mean, like, so yeah, like just in general, like it's difficult to be a healthcare professional. Then we have like COVID, which I didn't even talk about, but like COVID is
Yeah,
like that was so demanding. Like with the whole all of society was like, okay, it's all on healthcare professionals right now. Like, okay, take care of
yeah,
us all, show up, just keep doing what you're doing, times two, times three, times four. It's just
yeah.
astonishing that everyone didn't quit.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really tough. I mean, if you look at like the satisfaction rate of a lot of healthcare professionals right now, I think I read something, it was a little bit earlier this year, but it's actually lower now than it was during the pandemic, which is crazy to think about, right? So it's actually gotten kind of worse in many cases. Again, every hospital system's a little different, so I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush here, but you know, the whole doctor thing, we'll talk about physicians specifically, but it's all healthcare professionals. It's one of those things because, they usually have a nice car and they usually have a pretty good salary. And we've all watched House and, George Clooney on ER or whatever that show was. There's this romanticized idea of it. But like with any profession, the reality is just not as romantic as what we all see from the outside, right?
Yes.
And especially because we talked about lifestyle creep earlier, doctors are very susceptible to that because they're very like they're the A+ student kid in high school and they follow the road and they finally become an attending and they think, okay, now I'm allowed to buy a few nice things for myself, and inadvertently kind of walk into a form of anti-financial freedom, right, where it's like
I
that
like
personal
that
that per,
anti-financial freedom.
yeah, that personal sovereignty is not going to be there. If anything, it goes the other way. They start working overtime because they've got expensive car payments. The house is like a little too nice. The kids, we got to send them to private school because we got bought this house in the city, and it gets like really bad really fast. And so, listen, I have as much gratitude for medical professionals as anyone, having had front row seats to that whole pandemic and everything, and seeing how they're
Absolutely.
being treated now afterwards and what's kind of happening. There's been a lot of people getting fired, a lot more people being asked to do more. You know what I mean? And I kind of like the idea that we can provide not an off ramp, but just like a parallel strategy where it's like, I think if every medical professional could work 80% of what they're doing now or 75%, they would absolutely fall in love with their job again. Not to say that they're all out of love with the job. A lot of them absolutely love their job, but a lot of them are just a little too overworked. And so helping them build some like actual wealth and financial freedom, a little bit of, and doctors are well positioned to do that, right? They do make enough money that if they're smart and they deploy capital well, they can get pretty far pretty fast, actually. And so that's kind of who we speak to just because of our firsthand kind of perspective of that whole world.
Yes.
And it's been really great.
Awesome, man. Well, that's you covered a lot of ground, gave a lot of deep insight there, and of course, a very personal story, like you said. Obviously, what I didn't know, your wife is a doctor, and
Yeah.
worked many, 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 many hours during COVID and beyond. So that's amazing. Why is it that I was just gonna make not why is it, but make a comment. The ability, or when I left my job, I was given, allowed myself to have. It was very freeing when I started having supplemental income in addition to my engineering work. And I didn't even realize I had this fear. It was deep down, and it wasn't like it wasn't like fear of like falling off, tall, a 10-story building, but like just this fear about, oh, I don't want to go too far off the rails, or be too disruptive, be a good employee, and I don't want to lose my
Right.
job. And then as soon as I had
Yeah.
this parallel, like you said, parallel income, then it kind of that the fear lessened, and I feel I could be more authentic, more genuine, and or
Yeah.
just myself. Like, hey, if I even like it wasn't so much that I was concerned about being a bad employee. It was like if my job was to go away or something happened with the company, I could walk away from this and I would be fine. And that
Yeah.
is very freeing in itself. And I think that allows us to be more true to ourselves, and just just if you can remove these levels of fear, these levels of restraint, these levels of concern in the back of the
Yeah.
mind, the subconscious, I think that allows us as human beings to flourish.
I
Yeah,
totally
to
agree.
flourish.
And this might be, to circle it back to like a more meaningful way to look at the term sovereignty, you know what I mean? Because kind of what you're talking about with the W-2 full-time job is you have a 100% one-to-one dependency on something else, right? Like you are,
People don't think doctors are hourly workers. They're hourly workers, folks.
yeah,
They're hourly workers.
they literally are hourly workers.
you put in an hour, you get paid X amount. That's how it
It's a
works.
one-to-one deal, and like I said, like my wife, when she's working, like she's on maternity leave now, which is great, but it's a 12-hour shift, 7 days a week in a row, and like those shifts are brutal. I mean, there's again, it's a critical care situation where the worst things could be. It's emotionally draining. I mean, luckily she's an amazing doctor and is very stable and great at all this, but like, I don't know. I think a lot of people who might be, jealous of doctors, it's like, you try it. You try talking to grieving families 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, into your 50s, see how that goes. It's tough.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's a very yeah, it's a powerful way of saying that and thinking about that for just people to consider those things. So man, this has been an excellent conversation. Thank you for taking us through all these different things. And let's talk about forward looking here for Uplift Capital, where you want to take it, where you think you can go, and the kind of things and partnerships that you're looking for.
Yeah, so we're a young company. We right now we own most of our real estate ourselves, but we've done one sort of co-sponsorship with another group, and that what's gone really well. And we're looking to do more of that, but we're not in like a huge rush. It's been pretty tough out there lately, as you probably know, with the higher interest rates, and the bid ask on properties right now just seems really out of whack.
Yeah.
And so we're still growing our personal portfolio right now as well, but also looking for the next larger opportunities and to kind of build out our business even further. But we're investors first. We're in more investor side than entrepreneurial side, and like if the deals aren't there, we're not going to do them just to do them. So we're
Yeah.
very patient capital is how we like to think of ourselves, and it can be very frustrating because right now I've got a couple people kind of pinging me saying they want to get going here on the next investment, and it's really tough. But I think in the long run, 10 years from now, I'll be very glad that we stayed very diligent and patient. And I think right now is a very good time in the market to remain patient. So that's what we're doing now, but always looking to grow, always looking to keep learning from everything we're doing, and yeah, just always looking for more people to partner with.
Awesome, man. If I could ask, what size and class of asset do you like? And then, of course, some people may get the impression like, oh, it's all new stuff, but perhaps not, because we just talked about that's what you did professionally. But now, like, you're
Yeah.
investors, and what markets do you prefer? What markets do you find attractive?
Yeah, so we really like the Carolinas.
Carolinas, yeah,
Texas and Florida are always very appealing too. I'm starting to get more interested in Tennessee, but that's kind of a new thing. Just because Texas and Florida have been going kind of crazy with the insurance cost, property taxes in Texas. I've just been hearing some real horror stories lately about getting reassessed, crazy valuations. So kind of still expanding our footprint, or I guess becoming more targeted. The property that we invested in is in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and so that was like a Class A building actually. We own some Class C ourselves, although I'm starting to think that Class B plus is probably where we want to be. And it sort of depends if we're partnering with a really experienced group. We like going a little bit on the bigger side.
Yeah.
If and when we take down a deal ourselves, I think at first I personally actually like that sort of 80 to 100 door range where you're kind of, above the range of the typical like bigger pockets new investor, and a little bit under the range of the institutional folks, but the properties are big enough that there's still some meat on the bone, and hopefully you can still get property management stuff at a reasonable
the
cost.
property can pay for itself with on-site property management, third-party management, which is super critical or important if you don't want to hate your life. So just saying.
Yeah, exactly. I do a little property management myself right now, and I'm like, I don't. No more of this. This is as much of that as I want to do.
Less of that in my future life is where I want to go here. So
yes, exactly.
Amazing, Schuyler. So how do folks reach out and or get in contact with you? And also maybe do you have a social media presence, or do you just kind of like just a word of mouth so far?
Yeah, if you search for me on LinkedIn, I'm easy to find there. Luckily, my name spelling Schuyler, last name Cadwalader. That's very easy to find. There aren't too many of me, thankfully. You can also go to upwealthcapital.com. That's our website, and you can reach out to us really easily there. We've got a really cool free ebook for medical professionals. And those are probably the two best ways. I could keep going, but that's a good start.
Oh, it's amazing, man. That's amazing. Well, thank you for being an amazing guest. And we thank turning to my audience, my listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of the Investing Stuff You Should Know podcast. We thank you for listening, for supporting us. We always appreciate likes, reviews, comments, all that good stuff. So we'll see you out there. Until next time. Thank you.